Good evening, everyone. You are very welcome to the CPSMA webinar, Reconnecting with Parents, Meeting Challenges and Reaping the Benefits. Without further ado, I will now hand you over to your MC for the evening, Susan Carpenter. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. You're all very welcome to this webinar hosted by CPSMA on the theme of Reconnecting with Parents with myself, Susan Carpenter, and my colleague, Paul O'Donnell. There are three parts to our webinar this evening. We aim to discuss how positive parental relations can be created, fostered and sustained by schools, especially as we emerge from COVID-19 restrictions. We're going to have a short Q&A on this theme with a current school principal. And then we're going to explore how to manage parental issues or concerns which may escalate using the parental complaints procedure. And best of all, we promise to be finished in 40 minutes. After the webinar, we'll be forwarding you a short podcast on real case studies, explaining how schools managed some escalated parental concerns. Today's webinar is being recorded on the 17th of February 2022, and it's based on current guidance and legislation in this area, which may be subject to change. I'll now pass you over to my colleague, Paul O'Donnell, for the first section of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan, and good evening to everybody. So just to clarify, when we speak about parents this evening, we are using it as a collective term, which includes parents, guardians, foster parents, and other family circumstances where a particular adult is a guardian of a child. And parents having strong involvement in their child's education has links with positive academic performance, as well as improved behaviour, motivation, and high attendance levels at school. And close parental engagement with school is also linked with an improvement in parent-teacher relationships and positive school climate. So efforts to promote good school-parent relations is a win-win on the part of both parties. And communication between schools and parents has been restricted to some extent by COVID-19. But now that restrictions begin to lift, this is an ideal opportunity for some, I suppose, reimagining of the relationship between parents and schools. And we hope to have some suggestions for you here tonight. And fundamental to this structure is a clear understanding of roles and responsibilities on both parties. But first of all, before we get into that, we're just going to have a short poll just to get your opinion here on our topic. So Helena, if you wouldn't mind putting our poll up. So which of the following is considered the strongest facilitator of the homeschool partnership? Well-organized parent-teacher meetings, greeting parents at school in the morning and evening, regular updates from the school on school life and activities, or parental invitations to school events. And you have 20 seconds to choose what you think is the strongest facilitator of the homeschool partnership. And while you're doing that, I hope everybody is safe and well, battening down the hatches for Storm Eunice. And I believe some counties don't have school tomorrow, so some cases an extended break, and in other cases, some schools have one more day to go, or maybe a couple of days early next week. So our time is up, and I hope you got a chance to vote. And the answer to what is considered the best method, our result is regular updates from the school on school life, 66%. 21 for greeting parents, 11 for well-organized parent-teacher meetings, and 2% for parental invitations. Now, in terms of the research, what the research says is that the answer is greeting parents at school in the morning and evening. And when you think of all the work that goes into organizing and making sure the parent-teacher meetings take place properly, the amount of newsletters, letters, emails that go from schools and boards and principals and teachers on school life, and then the time practicing and planning and performing for school events, you might reasonably ask, why is a teacher or a principal standing outside a classroom or at the school gate or in the car park considered the strongest facilitator of homeschool partnership? And the answer in the research seems to be that it's seen as side-by-side partnership. It's informal, it's personal, it's two-way, and everybody is considered equal. And of course, in a lot of cases, schools may or may not have had this opportunity during COVID-19, but it is something to consider now as things open up. So in this circumstance, when you think about it, adults greet each other, discuss news, progress, raise and clarify points, and sometimes issues and concerns. And I know myself, I always used to say I'd far rather 30 small issues than 3 big ones. And I was delighted to see when we looked for some ideas in schools of good two-way communication, that some schools put this down as something they felt was important. So the research is backing you up, and it's a ringing endorsement for schools where principals and teachers make that time to be outside the school. And especially in a rapidly developing technological age, it's so important to remember there is no substitute for face-to-face relationship building to build trust and make parents feel like a welcome part of the school community. Now, I think by and large, it's accepted that during school closures, schools did a wonderful job of communicating with parents. But one of the challenges was reaching reluctant parents and who were maybe difficult to engage with. And there is a category, a wide category of those parents in schools. And I'm thinking specifically about parents of children, maybe with special educational needs, parents where English, no Gaeilge, is not their first language, parents who are foreign nationals or who have had a bad experience of primary school themselves, those who have addiction issues, poor literacy or numeracy levels, those from ethnic minorities like the Roma or community or travellers, or parents in direct provision. And it's important to remember, especially as restrictions lift, that the work that has been done to engage with those parents during school closures and since should be maintained and built upon. And this can be the class teacher, in-school management team, principal, but also SET teachers, homeschool community liaison teachers in schools that have them. And informally, the Parents Association can be used in this way to contact these parents and to make them more confident about becoming involved. So again, we're also back to informal conversations at the school gate. So I mentioned about roles and rights and responsibilities. And on enrollment, I suppose, parents are handing over the most important thing in their lives, their children, to the school. And that's a privilege, and it's also a big responsibility. And in one aspect of the research that tells us that schools' expectations of parents are often not outlined as clearly as they are as their expectation of pupils in terms of being around the school and their engagement with the school. And as a result of that, understandably, lines can become blurred and confusion arises. So the responsibility, I think it's fair to say, rests with the school to communicate this and to ensure that policies and practices are well explained to all families. So parents have the right to be included meaningfully, to be treated with respect, and to have information readily available about their child. And they also have responsibilities to foster a positive attitude to learning at home and to support the school also. And on the other hand, then, school staff have the right to be treated with courtesy and respect and a right to a safe working and a positive working environment. And they too have responsibilities for the curriculum, the safety of children, complying with school policies, and communicating regularly with parents. Now, to encapsulate really what I've said here in terms of how parents and schools engage is a sentence in these NEWB guidelines, and I've provided a link and you'll get the slides afterwards. And what it says is that the adults in the school have a responsibility to model the school's standard of behavior in their dealings both with the students and with each other, because their example is a powerful source of learning for students. So next of all, we asked in advance if schools could send us in some examples of what we'd call positive, two-way communication that they use in their schools. And a sincere thank you to everybody who did. And we've kind of divided them into two, both the formal and then the informal. And we have a poll for you after this as well, just to get your perspective on it. So the first thing I suppose here to remember is that ultimately in every school, ethos underpins everything that goes on in the school. And in terms of communication in a Catholic context, that's gospel values. And the ones that strike me most as being most appropriate in this area would be respect, fairness, and hope, and also service on the part of the school. And in relation then to formal methods, we have the Board of Management, parent nominees. 2 are nominated to the board. And when we talk about roles and responsibilities, we have other board members, teachers, community nominees, and patron nominees. So the question I have there is everybody on the board aware that they are not representatives of the groups who elected them? They're not batting for parents or batting for the teachers. They are a group and an entity together to make decisions collectively, discuss things collectively. So are they all aware of that? And also around confidentiality and around the agreed report and who communicates from the board and when. In relation to the Parent Association, it is a magnificent support to the school and a great way for parents to become involved in the school. And the National Parents Council, I have to say, are brilliant. I found in my own experience in working with parents to form parent associations and to provide training in terms of their roles and responsibilities. And around parent associations, the questions I would have there is, do they have a constitution? Do they have arrangements in place? Do they submit a list at the start of each year to the board about all the activities they wish to take place and get that approved? Are there arrangements in place when there is fundraising, what the purpose of it is, and when funds are transferred back to the board? But also, do they get a voice in what those funds might be spent on? And also, is there communication between maybe the principal or a teacher and the parent association as a link as well? Parent-teacher meetings and meetings for maybe children with additional needs as well are obviously ingrained in schools, and really important that they are two-way. There is a chance for the parent to give the perspective from home and also follow-up meetings if they're needed, or phone calls. Where would we have been without Zoom, without Seesaw, without Google Classrooms, without the websites, or email, all of those forms of communication during lockdown period? And I think they really have, it's been a triumph in terms of technology and how it's helped schools to communicate with parents and vice versa. And hopefully a lot of that will continue. But it's also important that there are boundaries and responsibilities put in place around them. Because I cannot advocate enough how important, as we mentioned, face-to-face, the role of phone calls are, especially to get good news home, or also when issues arise. Because we have found some instances where when issues arise, email might be easier, but we get a lot of email tennis where it's a school's view, then a parent's view, and a school's view, and a parent's view. So when it comes to resolution, it's really important, I think, that either face-to-face meetings or phone calls are a better way to help to resolve issues. And also then, a lot of schools have surveys around child protection procedures, around the school curriculum, around issues that are arising or plans that are in place. And also really important for schools to give the responses, give the feedback back to people who submit on those surveys so they see what the general view also is. Now, the other thing then is when we come to what we call other or informal methods of communication. And we just have some examples up for you this evening. And as you've seen in our poll, these are the ways often that have the most impact in building trust between the school and parents. So parental assistance. at swimming, school tours, educational trips, sports events, activities like that where schools need additional people to support, and the parents can meaningfully become involved. And I know there is vetting to be put in place, and also conversations with the parents, again, around what's expected of them, how they can help, their roles and responsibilities. And this is something that hasn't happened at all during COVID, and there's a chance to get in early and have those conversations and plan now. Initiatives in schools, this is a chance to harness the expertise of parents. ICT, green schools, Gael Vrathach, school gardening, elements where expertise of parents can be used. They can be on committees, they can lead initiatives, again, within the school context. Information evenings, I'm thinking here of, and this can be remote on platforms or hopefully in person. And I'm thinking here of an upcoming curriculum that's on the way, maybe support for new parents, and also maybe language classes or other events. These are some suggestions that have come in, which I think are great. So the school is a support for more general stuff as opposed to simply the curriculum. Another one then are in terms of open days and evenings. And that's a chance for parents to physically stand in the school to get a real sense of the place that their children are attending. And another one that I thought was really novel is a parents' room for meetings. So it's like a neutral space when meetings have to take place. Now, I spoke to a principal yesterday who had to go into the boiler house in her school to take a call because there was nowhere else in the room that she could have a confidential conversation. So this is not a reality for a lot of schools, but where it is, it's interesting to see that dynamic instead of being brought, for example, to the principal's office. Instead, it's a neutral place to meet. And also then, in terms of names and backgrounds, especially when dealing with maybe families from abroad, from other cultures, for a teacher or a principal to learn how to pronounce a child's name properly, or to learn 3 or 4 phrases of their native tongue, sends a really powerful message to those families to say, you are really important to us in our school. And finally then, school events. And this comes back to like the school gate. It's informal. It's a chance to meet side by side or meet in the middle to form those relationships that we've spoken about. So we have a very quick poll at the end of this section now. And this, I suppose, is food for thought. Given that we've just discussed here, Helena, if you could put up our second poll. And that relates then. So having engaged with this section, do you consider that roles and responsibilities of parents and staff are clearly communicated in your school? And it's up to you to decide, just based on what you've heard, if that is the case or if that is not. And it probably is to some extent in every school, but if you have to go on it, is it comprehensively done or is it not? That's, I suppose, your call to make now. This is where your opinion counts. And Helena, if you could end the poll there and let's see what the results of that are. So 73% yes, 27% no. And perhaps we have the wrong people at the webinar if everyone thinks that that is already the case. But as I say, there's always room for improvement. And thank you very much for your engagement in that poll. So next of all, I'm now going to introduce you to a guest at our webinar. And that is a principal, and that's Geraldine Connolly. And Geraldine is a principal in a special school in the Midlands. And she's been the principal there since 2000. And also she has a master's in education. Now, just in terms of her school, a special school in a small rural town, catchment area of 5 counties, pupils range from 4 to 18 years of age. And they would have pupils with disabilities in the moderate or severe to profound range, and some also with physical disabilities, syndromes, and or autism. And on top of that, there are approximately 50 staff, including teachers, SNAs, and bus escorts, and ancillary staff. So Geraldine, I'm exhausted even talking about your school setting and what you have. And I suppose one of the things that strikes me is you have a lot of communicating to do before you step outside of your school front door at all. But would you mind, one of the reasons why we got you on was it is a very complex setting. And to some extent, if you have good relationships in your school, then anybody can. So would you mind describing to us just practically what good communication in your school looks like?
Hi, Paul. I hesitate to represent good communication because we're all only learning about communication all the time. And one of the biggest learnings we had during COVID even was that reaching out to parents is the most important thing we do. And that's, I suppose, really where we sit in terms of communication in our community. So teachers are important, the students are most important, everyone is important, but the parents are the most important for us because we need them to feel committed to our school and we need them to feel that they can trust us. So we do need to be available to parents all the time. And I often say, you know, a parent will be on the phone and you're up to your tonsils, you know, and you just don't know where to turn. And you have to say, if it was the school inspector, I'd take that call because that's an important person. If it's a parent, that's a more important person. I need to take that call. So it's to have that sort of commitment to parents and recognise their importance in their children's education. So I suppose that's really the underlying thing that we would go with, you know.
So then practically, what does that mean in terms of day to day, if you're getting quite a lot of communication?
It means it takes a lot of time and you need to give it the time. And it's the same for the teachers, and teachers are busy. And especially in a special school, there's some very complex needs and it's very full on sometimes. But at the end of the day, if you're not communicating with parents, then you are not going to work with that child efficiently or effectively. And it's really important that we recognise the role of parents in everything we do and reach out to them. And when parents arrive to visit our school or decide they're going to enrol their child in our school, the first thing I say to them is, please ring us. If there's anything wrong, ring us. We will not think that you're a fussy parent. We need you to ring. Otherwise, we could keep doing the wrong thing. If they don't tell us, how will we know that we've done the wrong thing? And I always say that. And if a parent does, and we don't get that many complaints now, I don't want you to think we're getting these complaints all the time, but if a parent has a query for us or a concern, we need to hear that and we need to listen to it and they need to be heard. Otherwise, we won't know, do you know?
So,
just, yeah.
Okay, so let's say if you have a parent who has a concern, but maybe you think it's quite low level, but the parent is communicating very, very regularly. How do you deal with that situation then?
The same way. So, you know, if that parent is still concerned after you've spoken to them and they're ringing again and again and again, you are not giving them sufficient support. You're not making them feel comfortable. That's your job. We're there and they've trusted us to have their children in our school. We need them to continue to trust us. And we will say to them, we're going to, and this is bizarre, but if there's anything with a child in school, we make it our business to tell that parent. And we apologize and we say, I'm not trying to complain, not trying to alarm you, but you need to know, and we're just telling you, do you know?
So you're being proactive. Is that the case in terms of, say, issues that happen in school, getting messages to parents straight away? Is that the case?
Absolutely. And it's vital that we do that. And I recall one particular incident where a little girl fell over in the classroom and she fell back on her bottom. and she didn't cry, and the teacher got her up and she seemed fine and everything was okay. She had her lunch, she stayed in school, she went home on the bus, and the teacher just picked up the phone and rang just to say to the parent that little girl had a fall today. And during the night, the child woke up crying. And the mum rang the next day and said, if the teacher hadn't rung, she wouldn't have been so concerned. But because she knew the child had a little tip in school, they brought her to A&E, and the child had broken her collarbone.
Okay.
And they would never have known. The child wasn't able to tell it. And if the teacher hadn't tipped her off, that child could have gone for quite some time with pain.
Okay. And so, okay. So, and again, that's a very good example of a consequence, but quite often there mightn't be any. And I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but is there not an argument to say that, I mean, that's exhausting. If you're being proactive and communicating all the time, would it not be easier to just make judgment calls some of the time?
No, it's not. No. I'm sorry, I have to disagree.
Spit it out now, Jeremy.
Yeah, at the end of the day, these are the most important adults that we deal with every day. We're dealing with individual children. That child is the only thing that matters to that parent. Even if there's 6 in the class, 8 in the class, 60 in the school, 100 in the school, the parent isn't concerned with the other children in the school. They're only concerned with their own. And they want us to be concerned with that child. And we must make the time for that. That's above all things. This teaching, learning, and dealing with parents. That's it. You know, you have to get that into your head as a principal, I think. Once you start saying that the parents aren't as important, well, then you're on a slippery slope, I think.
And you mentioned that you don't have a lot of issues as a result of complaints. So that's what you're claiming anyway. I'm only teasing. Yeah. But my point to you is then, do you think because you are very proactive with your communication, that the result of that is that there are good levels of trust and the parents know that you will communicate, and there's less of them, I suppose, either preemptively then coming in asking what happened today or what was that issue?
Yeah, and that's it. Once, if you slip up on one little thing, then there's one other little thing. And the next thing is the third thing, and there's a catalogue of problems. And it becomes a major issue, and the parent loses patience with you. And it just is so sad, you know, and there's no need for that. We should be well able to deal with the small things and then not come up against the big things. And I know even when you go into Dunnes Stores to bring something back, and the person at the counter is saying to you, oh, I'm busy, and you've queued up for 5 minutes. Well, I can't help you today, and blah, blah. And the next thing is you're saying, it's the manager there, and you're getting all hoity-toity, and I've taken an hour off work and I've come here especially to return this item. I do not want to hear that that person's busy. I want her to deal with me as if I was the first customer in the shop that morning. And that's what I think as a school we need to do as well. We need to deal with that parent as if they are the only call you've got today or the only person who's coming to see you.
And I think that's a great analogy, actually, because we all know that feeling in another context where we're maybe on a phone, on an answering machine, or we're waiting to get through to somebody, and and how your blood pressure starts to rise. And I suppose, yeah, it's great to put it in a different way of how a parent might feel when they're just making, as you say, what might appear to be just a minor issue and just a phone call, but that it should be treated seriously.
Yeah, and I do think it's quite important that if a parent has a difficulty, that you make sure you explore that difficulty with them, that they get it out. You know, you don't go in with your answer or your excuse straight away. You let them talk, and you don't say, oh yeah, well, policy in the school is, and oh, we're just implementing what we should do, and oh, we can't be doing X, Y, and Z. You need them to really, really let it out. And I know one parent rang and she was very disappointed about a specific thing that happened with her child. And oh, she was so annoyed, and she was so cross with the teacher, and what was going to happen, and how could this have been allowed to continue? And she was absolutely furious. And I said, I understand why you're so disappointed. Gosh, that sounds so awful. And what did you think? And all this. And I wasn't patronizing because it did sound awful. Yeah. And she really was vexed. And within a couple of minutes, she was saying, but I don't want to give out about the teacher. My child loves her teacher. She's a great teacher and she does so much for the child. And she didn't want to complain, but she needed to ring and say something, and she needed to be heard. Most parents don't want to complain about the school. Most parents just start ringing because they're worried. They have a concern. And that's what you need to get into your head. They're not complaining.
It's not about the person, it's about the issue.
Yeah. And they're not complaining about the school, they're complaining about the thing that's happened. Most parents are fully committed to children's schools, it's a big part of their lives. And it's important that we recognise that the parents are a big part of the school's life and not just an add-on.
Yeah. And I suppose that was the kind of message we were trying to get there. So thanks for reinforcing that message in a practical way. And just many thanks for taking the time this evening, Geraldine. We really appreciate it.
I'm enjoying the presentation. We're all learning all the time. Well done. I'm taking notes throughout.
Maybe I should be taking some myself as well. Thank you, Geraldine. Okay, thank you. We're now going to pass on to our next section in the webinar, and that is I'm passing you over to my colleague, Susan Carpenter, who's now going to come in. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thanks also to Geraldine for sharing her experiences with us. As you'll see from the slide that Paul is popping up, we're going to explore the parental complaints procedure shortly. So just to get us started, Helena is going to pop up a quick poll for us so we can get a feel of how familiar we are with the parental complaints procedure. So some people may never have heard of it. Some may be vaguely familiar. Some may be well aware of the parental complaints procedure and its contents, and for some people they might feel far too familiar with it. So if you don't mind just making your quick choice there, it's entirely confidential. I won't be looking at who ticked which box. And we'll just take another quick couple of seconds. And Helena, you might pop up the answers first there, please, or the results. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've half of our audience here tonight are well aware of the procedure and its contents. Some are vaguely familiar, some have never heard of it, and there's, as we would sometimes find, a small percentage who feel they're far too familiar with it. So I suppose just to start off by saying sometimes parental concerns are escalated to the complaints procedure, so it's helpful to have an awareness of that process. So we'll just dive straight in, really. The parental complaints procedure has 5 stages, and it's commonly divided into 2 parts. Stage 1, which is known as the informal stage, and stages 2 to 5, which are more commonly known as the formal stages. And as with all procedures, it's very important to ensure that the parental complaints procedure is followed and that no stage is skipped or circumvented by any party. For example, if a complainant decides to skip stages by maybe writing to request that the matter be heard immediately at a Board of Management meeting when the complaint is still only at stage 1, this is generally not permissible. And we'll talk more about this in the podcast which accompanies this webinar. The purpose of the parental complaints procedure is to resolve issues and, insofar as is possible, restore relationships. This is a really important point to be remembered by all parties who enter into the procedure. The parental complaints procedure provides a mechanism for a complaint to be taken. It also protects the integrity of a complaint. It provides a framework for a complaint to be heard and a structure for the person against whom the complaint is being made to have a right of reply. And while all of this sounds very serious and potentially a little bit off-putting, it's important to note that the vast majority of issues or complaints are amicably resolved at the informal stage of the parental complaints procedure. So we cannot recommend highly enough that it's well worth putting time into resolution at this point. Stage 1, or the informal stages, is further subdivided into 3 subsections: 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. And as you may see shortly, some schools intuitively use stage 1.1 and 1.2 to resolve issues without formally stating that the parental complaints procedure is in use. And Paul's going to provide an interesting case study on this in our follow-up podcast. So let's dive into stage 1 of the procedure. Stage 1.1 of the procedure is the earliest and most informal stage. It provides an opportunity for a parent to raise their concern directly with the teacher involved. Stage 1.1 also provides an opportunity for the teacher to hear, respond, and seek to resolve the concerns of the parent where possible. In schools, we very often talk about this stage as referring the parent back to the teacher. If, for example, a parent was to contact the chairperson or principal about a teacher prior to having a chat with that teacher, they should be invited to contact the school office to arrange a time to have a conversation with the teacher to discuss their concerns. And teachers should be encouraged to take a proactive approach when meeting with parents in relation to any concerns which they may have had. And Geraldine spoke very well about that there earlier on. In most instances, a concern may be resolved very quickly with a conversation. Sometimes it can take a number of conversations to reach an amicable resolution, and both parents and teachers should be encouraged to try to resolve the matter between themselves. If the matter remains unresolved at stage 1.1, the complaint then moves to stage 1.2. And how stage 1.2 is approached is at the discretion of the principal. Generally, it's helpful for the principal to hear the parent's perspective in the first instance by meeting with them, to listen to their story before meeting separately with the teacher to listen to their story. This may take a number of meetings. Following this, the principal may think it appropriate to bring the two parties together to mediate a resolution between them. Again, this may take one or a number of meetings. Sometimes the principal may resolve the matter without requiring the parties to meet. And it's really important at all times to remain resolution focused. Playing the impartial role of mediator can take a very high level of emotional intelligence on the part of the principal. And it's very time consuming. But generally this time investment is well spent when it's focused on resolution and the preservation of trust and relationship between the parties. We would always encourage principals to contact us in the office for advice on the nuances of their approach and to discuss how best to respond to the likely responses of both parties, which may be emotionally charged depending on the substance of the complaint at hand. One final point to remember here. If the complaint relates to the principal, then the procedure starts here at stage 1.2. If it's unresolved and moves to stage 1.3, CPSMA supports the chairperson as a member of management who facilitates the rest of the process. At this stage, we then advise principals to seek their own advice as parties to the complaint. So, if the matter isn't resolved at 1.2, it then moves to stage 1.3. And that involves the chairperson of the board of management in the informal stage of the complaint. It's quite similar to stage 1.2 in that the role of the chair is to provide a space for the voices of all involved in the complaint to be heard and responded to, while remaining resolution focused at all times. Stage 1.3 remains an informal stage of the procedure, and it does not require the complaint to be lodged in writing with the chairperson, which is a notable difference between 1.3 and when the complaint becomes more formal on the move to stage 2. If a letter has been written, it's kept by the chairperson and then used if the issue moves to stage 2. Any such letter should not be read out at a Board of Management meeting at any time during stage 1, as the board may become involved at a later stage and should remain impartial until that time. We'll explore letters to the Board of Management in more detail in our accompanying podcast. We would strongly encourage chairpersons to contact us for advice when they become involved in the parental complaints procedure, particularly when at this informal stage, to support resolution before the matter becomes more formal. It is essential that the chair is unbiased in their approach, listening carefully to both parties, and offering opportunities for both parties to engage together to seek resolution. This may take a number of meetings with the parties individually and perhaps both together. Frequently, matters which have arisen as the result of a misunderstanding can be resolved with a lot of hard work by the chairperson at this stage. And very often, the involvement of the chairperson as an independent, unbiased individual can provide a stimulus for the resolution of the complaint. From time to time, however, the complaint may not be resolved at stage 1 of the procedure. And in that case, it's open to the complainant to move to stage 2, should they wish. The remaining stages of the parental complaints procedure are known as the formal stages. The move to stage 2 is heralded by the arrival of a complaint in written format. And as previously mentioned, it's important to note that should a complaint arrive in written format prior to stage 2, the procedure does not automatically move to stage 2. It remains at the previous stage, as stages in the procedure may not be skipped or circumnavigated. Again, just to mention, if a letter is received at an earlier stage, it's kept until required at a later stage. In fact, many complaints may originate with a letter or an email, and that's fine. It's just that the meetings referred to in stages 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3 are required to take place. Stages 2 and 3 of the procedure focus on the involvement of the chairperson in the process, and we strongly encourage chairs to contact us for individual advices on the particulars of the complaint when dealing with it through these stages. Every complaint is different, given the individuals and the issues involved, and we're very happy to spend time supporting chairpersons in these situations, often to a successful conclusion. When a matter comes before the board at stage 4, the process can become quite detailed. So it's important to be sure that fair procedure applies at all times. And we really implore you to contact us directly so our advisors can talk you through these procedures, which can be quite complicated. To support you in your work, we've developed a suite of school parent resources, including a link to the recording of this webinar and our accompanying podcast. The toolkit may be accessed at our website, cpsma.ie. So to summarise our webinar this evening, schools have an obligation to proactively build connections with parents. Establishing and communicating clear lines of responsibility for engagement is crucial. It's good to identify good practice. Make sure that your best practice is meaningful and provides a two-way opportunity for side-by-side partnership. If it's required, the parental complaints procedure should be followed. And please feel free to reach out for help if you need any support or advice. We've created a short podcast of parental complaints procedure school case studies. It's available in the resources being forwarded to you. It's also in the toolkit on the CPSMA website, and it's available from Spotify. We hope that we've given you some food for thought, especially as we exit COVID-19 and continue to build meaningful connections with parents and the wider community. So just to summarise, thank you very much for joining us this evening, and a special thanks to our guest Geraldine for her time and expertise. If you have any questions or queries on parental relations, or indeed any matter relating to school management, please contact us in CPSMA. Our advisors are always happy to speak with schools. You will receive a feedback survey by email following this webinar, and slides, recordings and resources will be forwarded to you by email in the coming days. Gur míle maith agam go léir, slán agus beannacht.